So I'd like to start by introducing myself. I'm Daniele. Some of you know me already because I've spoken to you perhaps through our Divio support. I'm on the team here at Divio. I'm a Django developer. And I'd also like to introduce my colleague, Tom, who's with us. And Tom's going to be helping in this session by taking your questions during the demo and moderating them afterwards. So Tom, I don't know if you'd like to say hello to our visitors.
Yes, hello. Thank you very much for joining. If you have any questions, please just put them in the group chat. If I can answer them, I'll do my best. But otherwise, what I'll do is I'll put them together and we'll take them perhaps at the end during the Q&A section. I already have a few on the emails, yeah, that should help get us started. So over to you, Daniela.
Great. Well, thanks very much for coming. We've got quite a few people in here. I think it's the most who have ever signed up for one of these demos. We've got three main things to show you, and they're all new features on our platform that the team have been working on. We've got our new backup system, we've got the project mirroring system, and the external Git hosting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go straight into demonstrating those to you. As Tom says, I hope you've all found the chat facility in Zoom, and leave a message there for Tom. He'll pick it up. He might ask me to answer it straight away, or more likely, we'll come on to it at the end. So feel free to use that. We'll dive straight in now to backups. Now, we've had backups on Divio Cloud for a very long time, since the beginning, in fact. But we recently launched an updated backup system. And the new backup system is much more powerful and flexible and faster than the old one, especially for those of you who have got very large projects. So the backups menu is here, just as it always has been, but the options are a little bit different. So these are the scheduled backups that I have for this project. The scheduled backups are those that take place automatically according to an automated schedule. So in this case, as you can see, they all take place around about 3 o'clock in the morning, or before the clocks changed, it was 2 o'clock in the morning. And this runs daily. The scheduled backups are stored. They have a routine by which they're thinned out, so they'll be recorded daily. Then after a week, the most recent weekly one will be recorded. Then after 4 weeks, the most recent one of those will be kept, and so on. So it's reasonably granular, and you've got easy access to your database contents and your media contents should you need to restore them. So what this tells us here is that our next backup is going to be at 3 o'clock in the morning tomorrow. Here are the backups that have been made. They're all backups from the live server. The test server of the project is not backed up by default. It's on these were done on the daily schedule, and this is the most recent weekly backup. In each case, we've backed up the database as well as the media storage for a total of 49 or so kilobytes. And should I wish to, I can restore this backup to the server. I've also got some additional options here, but let's have a look at restore first of all. So when I restore, I can choose what to restore, whether it's going to be the database and or the media. So I could opt only to restore the database, for example. And normally you might restore it to the current project, the same project the database, the backup was taken from. And you can choose to restore the backup to either the test server environment or the live server environment. So that can be quite useful, for example, if you want to move data or media between one of the two servers to the other. I can also restore not to this project, but to a related project. So a related project might be a copy of this project or a fork of this project. And I'm going to explain what the difference between those are later when we come and talk about mirrors. But it means that if you have two projects that are related, that they share a code base, you can actually restore the database or media from one to the other. which is very useful when you're developing and testing. And finally, I can even create a brand new fork of this project with the backup. So I'll create a project with these contents straight away. And that's also very useful when you're developing or debugging. So you could just say this will be a backup demo fork, and you can choose which organization you're going to put it in, and it will restore it and create the new project, and it will be ready to go with that data. We also have the option to download the data from the database. Now, before, when we did this, especially if it was a large download, you'd have to wait and then wait for it to be prepared for you. Now what happens after you hit prepare download, you can choose what you want to have downloaded, hit prepare, and it'll do it in the background, and then it'll send you an email message. And with the email message, you'll have a link that shows you that you can use to download that to your own local computer. So there'll be no waiting required from that. It's all much more efficient and faster than it used to be. I know that some people who had very large media storage would sometimes be waiting a long time for backups, or would even find that things could get held up by waiting for backups. And that doesn't happen any longer with the new system. So that's the scheduled backups. As well as scheduled backups, we also have on-demand backups. And these are the backups that you can perform on an ad hoc basis whenever you need them. So again, we have the report here, which is fairly similar. So I've got two backups here. You can see one from the 2nd, one from the 3rd, which is today, one from test and one from live. In this case, I backed up only the database. In this case, I chose to back up both database and media. And here I have a note that I attached. So let's have a look at how this works. Let's back up the live server. I can choose what I'm going to back up. And this is a backup for demo purposes. That's the note to myself, so I know what it's all about. Hit create. And you'll see that it all takes place in the background. The backup's running, so it gets queued first of all. This is only a small project, so it'll be pretty quick. And after a few seconds, it'll be ready. While that's going, I can show you that once again, we have the options to restore the backup to the same project, a related project, or to a brand new one indeed, if we wanted to do that. And also we can download them just in the same way. That backup is now ready. I mentioned that it's much faster and more efficient than it used to be. Now, if you use the Divio app or the Divio command line interface, you'll know that you can pull media from the cloud to your local computer. And again, if you have very large media storage, sometimes that will time out. For example, if you have a slow connection and it's not fast enough to pull the data down in time, your connection may time out and it will stop downloading everything. The backup system is a very good way around that, because it will always work. If you've got large media that you want to pull down to your computer and the CLI or the app are too slow for that, you can just create a new backup, opt to pull down the media, and then once you've done that, download it as before. It's also a good way, if we look at the dashboard here, you'll be familiar perhaps with these options where we can not just deploy, but also copy data from test and deploy, or on the other hand, copy data from live and deploy. If you find that presents a problem for you, then you can use the backup system instead to restore a particular backup to the test or live server. So we've got a lot of new technology in the backup system, which we're really happy with. It's been working really well now for a couple of months. And we're going to be extending some of the benefits that we've gain from that to other parts of the infrastructure. So when you're next on the control panel, go to your backups menu, have a look at the options you've got there, and I think you'll find them a greatly improved feature of the control panel. So let's move on. Let's have a look at the mirrors functionality. So let's go back to the overview of projects here. Now, what I have here, I've got a project called Mirror Projects Original, and you'll see here I've got two mirrors, Mirror 1 and Mirror 2. I'll explain to you what that's all about now. When you have a project, you can duplicate it. And we have three options for duplicating. We can copy a project, which is the simplest to understand. It's just what it says. It takes the project code, database, media storage, and makes a new project out of them. And then that new project will exist in its own right as something that's entirely separate. It will have its own subscription. It will exist completely independently, but it will have been stamped out from the original. When we create a copy, we copy of original, and when we duplicate it, you'll get the familiar dialog for setting up your subscription, which we can skip for now. And here is the brand new project that's being prepared. If we have a look at the list of projects, we've now got a copy, and that project is exactly what was in the original here. Another option for duplicating a project is to fork it. And forking is really useful for developers because what it does is maintain the project's Git history. And that means that you can fork your project to a second one, do development work on the fork, and then later you can actually merge back commits in the new fork to the original. So it's a good way of working in a team with, maybe you have a base project that you use a lot that somebody uses to create a new one, add some features or some improvements, and that you then want to roll back into the original. And that makes use of Git. You can use the Git remotes in the normal way to achieve that. But what I'm interested in talking about to show you now is something much newer, which is mirroring, which we've had on our system for a while, but has been less publicly available because it's quite advanced. So a mirror is similar to a copy or a fork in that it duplicates a project. But what's different is that the code base of the mirrored projects are exactly the same as the code base of the original. So this original project has two mirrors. This only appears in the menu when your project has a mirror. So here are the two mirrors of this project. And I can control them here because they are dependent on this original project. So if we quickly run through this, we have two mirrors. One has the test server deployed, but the live server not deployed. There are no pending commits, and then we've got access to the dashboard, to the environment variables, to its domains, and we can open the live and test sites of the mirrors in both cases. This one has not been deployed on test or live. But if we look at the dashboard of one of these two mirrors, you'll see that some things are actually missing. So for example, we don't have access to this mirrored project's add-ons. We don't have access to its settings or to its repository view. And that's because those are all concerned with the code base. And the code base for this project exists only here at the original. So this one is where the add-ons are determined, for example, or the settings such as the base project. So if, for example, I went into the add-ons here of the project and I decided that I was going to add a new add-on, or perhaps change the version of one of these add-ons. Give it a moment to load up. So we might say that we want to move to Django 2.0.13. So let's update to that. Update. Now here I've got a pending commit on this project. So this is the original. I'm going to deploy that. Meanwhile, let's have a look at the at our mirrors. I'm just going to refresh this view. Now nothing has changed here, and that's because the mirrors always track. They always follow the live server of the original. That means you'll have your mirror that you do your work on. Sorry, you have your original that you do your work on. You'll test things on the on its test server, and then when you're satisfied that it works as it has now, you'll deploy that to the live server. I need to wait a moment for that to happen. And once this commit has been deployed on live, it'll also be available for me to deploy on the two mirrors. So let's give that a moment more. I need to wait for it to, what it's doing now, it's built the project, and it has to get the image that we use for the project and push it up so that it can be reused easily. So I can hit deploy now. One of the nice things about this system is that because we are using Docker images, now these deployments can be quite a bit faster, because all we need to do is deploy the image. We don't need to do all the building from scratch. So that's already scaling. And although the original and its two mirrors share their code base and add-ons and so on, they will of course all have their own environment variables. Don't have any set here. They'll have their own cron jobs. They'll have everything. They'll have their own subscription. They'll have all the things that make a project unique, but will share the code base. So let's go back to the dashboard here, and that's finished now. So let's see what the mirrors have to say. We can see that now we've got pending commits on the test server as well as on the live server. And with these two mirrors here, if I want to roll out those changes to the live servers or the test servers of the all the mirrors at once, I can do that. So let's choose, yep, we've got the test environment chosen. I'll hit deploy selection, and it's going to deploy both of those at once, as if I had been into the original projects. Here's the first mirror, and hit deploy over there. And again, it's doing this very fast because all it needs to do is push around the image. Now I'm doing this with two projects. I can have more than two mirrors. If I want to create another mirror, I'll just hit mirror, and this will be mirror projects mirror 3. Duplicate it as a mirror. Of course, I can skip the subscription. And here's that project. Again, with now 7 undeployed commits. And if I go back to my, if I go back to the original and have a look at the list of mirrors, we now see 3 mirrors, 2 with a test server deployed. None of them yet have the live server deployed. So why not let's deploy the live server to all of them. We've got 3 here. I can keep adding mirrors in this way. We have clients who have got over 500 mirrors of a single project. So it works really well when you have a franchise system. You can imagine having a shop or a website that's specific to a certain kind of industry or type of organization. And you might have developed some custom applications for it and know that it really works very well. So rather than having to maintain 500 different projects, you can maintain just one code base and roll out the changes after testing them to 500 different projects at a time. I'm not sure if I actually hit deploy there. Let's hit. Sorry, I forgot to hit deploy. And hit deploy like that. If you had 500 or 600 or even 1,000, it would go through them one by one, deploying them. By default, it deploys them 5 at a time, and you could leave it running overnight, and it would go through all of them one by one until they were all deployed. So it allows us to offer a system to our users who might have 500, 600, 700 or more sites, and to manage those all from a single place. So if you ever find yourselves working with that kind of franchising type of website, or you have a website that you have variations of for different users that maintain the same code base, please have a look at Mirrors, because this is going to be a real lifesaver for many, many of our users as they start to take advantage of it. I think that's all I need to show you about Mirrors, but if you've got some questions, please ask them in the chat and Tom will collect them and we'll look at those later. The last thing I want to show you that we've got on our plate for today is the external Git hosting. So our projects all have Git repositories. So if we go back to this one for the moment, sorry, I should have gone to the original. Let's go to the original. It has a repository, and by default, it uses our own Git server. So if you use the command line, for example, you'll know that you've interacted with Git there. But we've had a lot of requests from our users who are using GitLab or GitHub or perhaps some other kind of Git hosting repository, and they would like to use those for their Divio cloud hosting, because they have collaborations set up there and because they're used to doing it for various reasons. And that's now available for us as well. So let's have a look at how that works. I'm going to create a brand new project. And okay, this is an external Git demo. So we'll just create a simple Django project. Now, normally it would be on our Divio internal Divio repository, which is private, which is free, but we're going to instead use, I'll use GitHub for this. So here's GitHub, where I've got the GitHub page to create a new repository. Let's just choose a suggested name. We need to initialize the repository. We'll add a README, and what that does, it creates a master branch on the repository, which is what our control panel needs. So let's create that repository. And the repository is now created on GitHub. So I can get hold of its URL from here. And that's what the control panel wants to know. It wants to know the URL of the external Git repository. So I'll paste that in there. The next thing is that in order for this to work, Divio Cloud needs to be able to access the repository. It needs to be able to authenticate with the repository, and it needs to be able to write to it. And that's because when the Divio control panel changes add-ons or settings in the project, it writes them to Git. So let's get this. This is the public key. I'm going to copy the key here, and I'm going to set that up in this project. So in GitHub is slightly different from GitLab, which is slightly different from Bitbucket, but they all follow the same fundamental system, that here in the settings, we can set up a deploy key. So of course, there's a brand new repository with no deploy keys. I need to add one. So let's paste in the key and we'll give it a name, Divio Cloud. And importantly, we need to tell GitHub that the owner of this key is allowed write access. Otherwise, Divio Cloud won't be allowed, the control panel will not be allowed to write to this. Good, so that's set up now. And when I hit continue, it's going now to check that the key works. It's trying out the key in the door, so to speak. So we'll give it a moment to have a quick talk to GitHub, and it's happy about that. That has worked. So let's continue with the configuration. We're set up there now. We will skip the subscription. Just go with a free one for now. And it's now setting up our project. Give it a moment here. And as soon as it starts doing that, I want to show you something on GitHub. Good. So it's provisioning the project. While it does this, what our control panel does is make commits. You see it's 4 undeployed commits. This is going to go up to, I think, about 5 or 7. If we look at GitHub, we'll see that those commits are landing here right now. I think this will go up to 8, if I'm not mistaken. So the last one was just now, was 126 seconds ago. So our control panel is now writing data to the repository on Git. You can see this is the, if you've worked with one of our projects before, this should look pretty familiar. There's our Docker Compose file, the Docker file, and so on. And I think it stops at 6 actually. So there we are. And that means now that our control panel can write to Git. And when we make changes on GitHub, we'll be able to use those commits here as well. So let's make a change to this project. Let's go into the README. And I'm just going to edit it here because it's quite easy to do it like this. Let's save that, commit those changes. So a commit is now landed on GitHub as if I'd pushed it. And we now have 6 undeployed commits here. If I hit update, it'll take a moment and watch this number here. There you are, it's updated and it's pulled in, not wrong word, it has checked Git and now knows that there's an extra commit on the repository. What would be really nice would be to have the control panel know automatically when commits arrive. So you as a developer might be working locally, you'll push a commit to GitHub, and then we want the control panel to know about that straight away. And we'll do that by setting up a webhook. As you can see here, it says webhook not set up. So let's go and have a look at the repository settings where we can do that. Give us a second. The reason it's taking a moment here is because it's actually checking. So this is what we set up earlier. Do you remember we used the public key we gave the public key to GitHub so that the control panel can write to GitHub. We know about the last checked out commit. This is something that people like to use. They like to have different branches for the live and test server. So we could set, for example, the test server to use develop and the live server to use master. But what we're interested in now is setting up the webhook so that GitHub or GitLab or Bitbucket can tell the control panel when there are new commits available. So let's do that now. We're going to set it up for GitHub. So give it a moment while it checks. Okay, it's given us 2 pieces of information here. One is a URL for the webhook, and the other is a shared secret. So I'm going to copy the webhook URL. And again, this is slightly different in GitLab and Bitbucket, but not hugely different. And if you're familiar with those already, then you'll know where to find these things. So in the settings for the project, I want to go to webhooks, and I'm going to add a webhook. This is the payload URL. That's, in other words, the URL that GitHub must use to tell when there's a new commit available. And then because we don't want any old thing to talk to the control panel without knowing who's doing it, we'll give it a secret so that we know it's really GitHub. All the other settings can be left as they are. The defaults are correct. We want to know about the push events. So we'll add this webhook now. I do not need to say that as a password. Good, so there's the webhook there. And if we go back to the dashboard, as you can see, it no longer has the warning about the webhook not being set up. So let's test it. Let's go back to the README file, which is the safest thing to edit here. Make another little change. Commit the change. And now you'll see this after a moment change to 8 automatically when there you are. The GitHub repository sent a message, sent a signal to the control panel and told it that there's another commit there ready. So we can now go ahead and deploy. So that's something that people have been asking for a long time. It's taken us a while to do it because it's a really important thing to get just right and to make it work effectively, not just within our control panel, but also for these different providers, GitLab, GitHub, Bitbucket. You can also use other providers, but those are the ones that we have built-in support for. You could even use, for example, your own private Git server. So those are the three things that I wanted to show you. The new backup system. So take a look at the backups there and make use of it and enjoy those features. You'll find that projects on business and economy subscriptions have got different backup schedules. So if you want to make use of automated backups, that comes with our business class subscriptions. But all the advantages of speed and efficiency and flexibility and what you can back up and how you can restore and download things, those are available to everyone. We have the new mirroring feature, which we think is going to be extremely useful for many users. And for some users, it's going to offer them a suggestion about a new way that they can work to make their own work more efficient for their clients. So we have clients who have been creating new projects that are very similar to each other, who can now consider whether they can really simplify their workflow by just developing, in effect, one project and using only different environment variables, different cron jobs, different project-specific things to differentiate those projects from each other. So we already have some who are doing it. As I said, we've got at least one with well over 500 projects now, and it's been working beautifully for quite a long time. So that's been a very strong test case for it. And I hope that other people are going to find similar advantages. And finally, we now have something that many people have wanted for a long time, external Git hosting for your projects. So I'm going to stop there with my demo, and I'd like to find out if you have any questions. Maybe Tom has collected some questions that you'd like me to address, because I'd be very happy to do that.
Yes, thank you very much, Daniela. I have a few questions here that came in via email, actually, that I'll run through. First question is, does the new backup system work with all Divio platform types, such as, for example, Node.js?
Yeah, it's as long as it's using our database and our media storage, then yes, it's going to. So any project that's using our infrastructure in the normal way is going to be backed up that way. Not the code base, because the code base is maintained in Git. Although I should say that each backup is associated with a Git commit. So you can find the Git commit, the state of the code base, with the state of the media and database contents at any particular moment in time.
Okay, and I think following up quite nicely into that was the next question. How do I know what each backup contains? Can I, for example, write a change log for each backup? So, for example, if I'm doing a backup, can I add some meta information to it?
Yes, let's go to the, I think I've got a couple of examples of that here. If we have a look at our backups, there are no notes on these ones because these ones were made automatically. But on the ones that I did on demand, the ad hoc backups, here you might leave a note to yourself like that this is a pre-migration backup and you backed up the database only, or that this was a backup just for demo purposes. So you can leave a little reminder to yourself why you made the backup. And here you can see exactly what has been backed up. So in this case, it was only the database. Here, both the media and the database.
Okay. The next question was, my company does not use GitHub, GitLab, or Bitbucket for its Git repo provider. Can we still use it with Divio's external Git support?
Yes, you can. Sorry, let me go back to the project, which has the, there you are. The most important thing is that the control panel needs to be able to authenticate with the Git provider. So this is using SSH, and we use the SSH URL and a public key. We can also do it with HTTPS, although we strongly recommend that everybody uses SSH. It's much better. Although, having said that, we do have some users whose corporate networks, for example, disallow SSH, and they have to use HTTPS instead. So that can be done, but it's much better to use SSH. And as long as the Git provider, which actually, as I mentioned before, could be your own private Git server, can handle authentication from our control panel, whether it's via SSH or HTTPS, it'll be able to do that. That's absolutely crucial. Less crucial, but still extremely useful, is that it can support webhooks so that we have the two-way communication between the control panel and the Git repository, so that when new commits arrive at the Git repository, the control panel will be informed automatically. That's, I would call that a really nice to have rather than being absolutely crucial, because even if you don't have that, you can always manually update here. But of course, it would be much better if you do have that two-way communication. And I think most major Git hosting providers will give you webhooks of that kind. And of course, if we find that there's a request for another Git provider that we haven't got built-in support for, we'd be happy to look at providing that if there's enough demand.
Okay, and let's move to a question on the chat. A very good question. I'll try to sort of abstract it if I may.
Yeah, please do.
Can you use the Divio platform towards private clouds? In this case, for example, could you use it on-premise hardware or perhaps in a specialized cloud environment? Essentially, what are the underlying requirements, I think, for a cloud Divio to be used towards it?
So we have various components in our infrastructure. And the one that we're looking at here, this is our control panel. Now, we have customers, for example, using our control panel with a private region. So these projects here, they are on our, as you can see, they're on our US region. We also have regions in Europe and the UK and other places. And some of those regions are private, that they're specific to a certain customer. But we also have the option to have self-hosted regions. So you can use our control panel with on top of your own infrastructure. So yes, that is possible. And we're, at the moment, we are using mostly AWS, but we are moving towards being able to use our systems on multiple vendors, so that we're not limited. We're very far along that way already. You're not limited to using a particular vendor. You're not limited to using our infrastructure. You can even take our control panel's software and run the whole thing in-house on premise, so that nothing leaves your premises if you wanted to. That's very important, for example, for organizations like banks, for example, or financial institutions that have to maintain a great deal of care over where their data are going. So I'm not sure who asked that question, but I hope that provides the answer you needed. Needless to say, by the way, if someone has a query about on-premise hosting or private region hosting, please contact us in support, and we can discuss that with you further. Yes, I see there's a question about good. No, continue, Tom, please. I'll let you be in charge of the questions. That's better.
Okay, so I think we're almost out of time, so we've got perhaps time for one more. So you mentioned one, Daniela, but what type of let's see, what type of example use cases would you see for using mirrors?
Imagine that you've developed a suite of applications. For example, you've developed an e-commerce package, a shop. Now, every shop needs fundamentally the same kind of functionality. It needs to be able to display items, sell items, take the money, and so on. You don't want to have to do that, build that 500 times and manage that 500 times every time there's, for example, a Django update. Because fundamentally, all the software there will be very similar, especially for smaller sites, because a small shop or a small online company doesn't need lots of custom software. So in those cases, a vast deal of time can be saved by reusing the same code and changing only the things that don't need to be changed, that truly are individual to the project. And it makes things, time in development, but especially time in things like deployment and management and updates and avoiding bug fixes because something has changed on one but not the other. So it's a way of getting very scalable, reliable deployments across multiple sites. You could imagine if you had, for example, cornered the market in websites for hairdressers, where you'd have an appointment booking system, and your models and your latest news, and the things that any hairdresser who wanted a website might ask for. And this way, it's possible to offer sites that meet those needs at a lower cost because there's less work involved for the developer.
I think that's the end of the questions we have here now, Daniela. I think we're actually just about running out of time as well. So it's
okay.
And just to reiterate, if you do have any questions, please do contact us. Very happy to receive any questions you might have.
If I may, Tom, I want to just pick up a question from the chat that I saw about the Git hosting, about managing conflicts, which I think is quite an interesting question. And the answer is there's no difference in our external Git hosting from how it already works at the moment. If you update an add-on on the control panel, it writes a commit to the repository. Now, if you then push a commit to GitHub or to Divio Cloud, and there's a conflicting commit there already, you will have to resolve that commit conflict, that Git conflict, by doing a merge in the usual way. So there are some things that that have always needed and probably will always need manual interaction. So there's no change in that, and you can even avoid it by just doing things in the right order. Sorry, Tom, there's another. If you have mirrored sites, do they all have to be on the same subscription? No, they do not. They can all have completely different subscriptions because the subscription is dedicated to the project and not the code base. So you could have one on a very high performance business subscription and others on economy or even free subscriptions while you develop them. There's no need for that. They're completely independent in that respect. So, and then there was a last question, I think, which is, would Divio be a good platform for a freelance web developer to use for small projects? Well, yes, we have quite a lot of those on our platform. And if you're seeing the services and features that you want and the price is right for you, go for it. So I think that probably is it. And we've taken quite a lot of people's time, probably an extra 5 minutes of their time more than we expected to. So I'd like to say thank you, Tom, for helping out. It's always really nice to have somebody managing things with me. And thank you very much for everybody for your time and attention and your questions. Please don't hesitate to ask us by dropping us a line in the usual way. And if you've got any specific requests, we'd be really glad to hear from you.